Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you everybody for coming to our webinar today. Haley and I would like to really introduce everybody to the CircaPain Project, which is something that we've started in collaboration with the University of Montreal, the Kingston Health Sciences Center, and the work has been funded by the CIHR SPORE Chronic Pain Network. And it really is trying to find new ways of thinking about pain and to identify potential therapeutic targets using a personalized approach. I'll go ahead and introduce the team behind it. And the team includes professors, team members from, like I said, University of Montreal, from Queen's, from KGH, Kingston General Hospital. And I think really importantly, I'd like to point out that we have 3 patient partners who have helped to really shape the project and to give us the insight of the person with lived experience to craft the questions that we're asking to make sure that we cover the right ground in terms of what we're doing. The first person who was linked with the project was Leslie Singer, and Leslie is at McGill University and is a patient partner with the Chronic Pain Network. And Leslie and I have been working now together for the past, I think, almost 4 years now. And she was involved with the animal studies that we've been doing, as well as the human work, and trying to help us provide new ideas of how to do things within the laboratory. And we're really fortunate to have Mary Burkaniak and Jennifer Daly-Sear join us in the past year and a half or so to really give us the advice that we need in how to get this project to the national level. So moving it from the Kingston site that we had done previously with Leslie to that more national, across Canada study that we're hoping to do. So going to talk about what the next phase is the fact that pain is really universal and everybody feels pain. And it's actually, there's a protective mechanism, right? We need to know when we touch a hot stove or when, our knee is injured. And that pain signal helps to provide that information to us that, you got to be careful, something bad is happening. The problem is when pain becomes chronic, as you all know, at that point, pain is not necessary. We don't need to have that pain. And trying to understand what's causing it and why that pain is there is really important. And that's why we began this study. The pain that we feel actually comes from different sources. So like I said, there's that pain that you feel when you touch a hot stove or when you hit your nail with a hammer. That's a type of high threshold or nociceptive pain. And that's caused by a noxious stimulus. So something that is really an overpowering stimulus of pain. And that's giving us that very quick withdrawal response to move away from whatever that source of pain is. The other categories of pain that we have are low threshold pain. And this is divided into inflammatory and neuropathic. There's also a third category that we don't really talk about as much because we don't know what it is, and that's called dysfunctional pain. And dysfunctional pain is one where we don't know what the etiology is behind it, like what are the mechanisms that are causing it. Inflammatory pain is pain that's caused by inflammation. So if you can think about something like arthritis, where you have an immune response that's causing a change in the tissue environment, and those immune cells are causing the pain, that's considered to be inflammatory pain. Neuropathic pain, as that occurs with diabetic neuropathy or post-herpetic neuralgia, these are caused by neuronal damage. So something has caused an injury to the nervous system, whether it be in the spinal cord, the brain, or out in the periphery with our sensory neurons. And that response changes the neuron itself. And those changes within the neuron lead to that low threshold chronic neuropathic pain that occurs. One of the things that we've begun to realize now, though, is that neuropathic pain, like inflammatory pain, is caused by the immune system. The immune response is really important here. Now, 25% of Canadians live with chronic pain. That's a lot of people. And so trying to understand this pain is really important. What we know from previous studies and work that's ongoing in our laboratory is that the time of day at which you feel pain changes. Some people have constant pain, meaning when they wake up and when they go to sleep, their pain level doesn't really change throughout the day. Other people start off with lower pain levels during the morning and end up with higher levels at night. Well, some people have the exact opposite. They start with higher pain levels in the morning and end up with lower pain levels at night. And so understanding why this pain is fluctuating could be a potentially important cue or response that we can use to better understand why that pain is occurring in the first place. So like I said, the immune response is really important in pain. So if you can imagine, if you've cut your finger, there's going to be that initial response in the neuron that says there was damage here. That signal gets sent to the spinal cord through the dorsal root ganglia, or the DRG, where our sensory neurons lie. And then that signal then propagates up to the brain, where we have the feeling of pain. What's really important to know is that these immune cells out in the periphery that responded to that injury actually secrete a variety of molecules and mediators. These include cytokines and chemokines, which are signaling molecules that the cells use to communicate not only with each other, but with their environment and other cells out in the periphery or in the spinal cord, as well as growth factors and lipids that they secrete. And each cell type secretes a different type of set of mediators and different classes of these mediators. And sensory neurons that innervate basically every part of our body actually have the necessary receptors to respond to these molecular stimuli that the immune cells secrete. So that's a really important thing to think about, is the fact that the nervous and the immune system are actually really tightly intertwined. Whereas about 10, 15 years ago, people were saying that the brain and the spinal cord are these immune privileged sites. We're actually learning that they're not. And in fact, what's happening is that the nervous system is almost a branch now of the immune system. And this happens not only in the periphery, but also in the spinal cord, where after neuropathic injury especially, you can have those peripheral immune cells rushing into the spinal cord to cause more activation of those neurons within the spinal cord. And the injured sensory neuron out in the periphery is also going to be sending signals into the spinal cord to further potentiate that pain response. What we've discovered more recently, from about 2015 onwards, is the fact that the immune system, which is really, we think, a key to driving the pain response, has a circadian rhythm. We know, for instance, that every single immune cell in the body follows a rhythmic response in terms of when they enter the bloodstream and go into specific tissues. For instance, neutrophils get released from the bone marrow in the morning, circulate throughout the body, and then home into specific tissues at night. And so one of the things that you might know is when you wake up in the morning and you have those crusties in the corner of your eyes, those are actually dead neutrophils that came in during the dark phase, during the night phase, to clean all the dirt and debris that's in our eyes. And because it couldn't re-enter the circulation, those neutrophils die and then collect in the corners of our eyelids. But these neutrophils go into every kind of tissue throughout the night, and they clear all the damaged or dead cells in our body, And then they go back into the bone marrow where they go to, if you will, die themselves and get cleared by the system. So these immune cells have a rhythm when they're in our when they are in our bloodstream, and they also have a rhythm. In the next slide, you'll see here in terms of the genes that they express. Now, this is really cool. What this study did was they actually took different cells or different organs out of the mouse, and they asked whether or not these cells can have a circadian rhythm. And what they showed here, so what you're seeing in the middle figure here, where it says spleen, lymph node, and macrophages, is that the spleen and the lymph nodes, so the whole organ, actually has a rhythm that it maintains within a petri dish. And macrophages, the individual cells themselves, also have a rhythm. And these organs and these tissues have a rhythm within the petri dish for up to about 5 days or so. And those rhythms regulate the expression of specific genes within the organs and within the cells themselves. What we've discovered is that there's about between 10 and 50% of all genes are under circadian regulation. And that means that within a 12-hour span, a 24-hour span, what we have is genes turning on and off again, specifically within cells or organs. And what's really cool, we think, is that the genes that get turned on and off vary between the cells and the organs themselves as well. So understanding what's happening at the molecular and the cellular level, we think is going to be really important to identifying what the molecules are that these immune cells might be secreting that could be acting on that pain response that we see in people. Now, we also know from recent work from Queen's University, and as well from some other groups out in Europe, is that pain follows a circadian rhythm. And what we showed at Queen's back in the early 2000s was that pain follows this increasing rhythm throughout the day in neuropathic states. So with diabetic neuropathy and postherpetic neuralgia, what this study did was it asked people to take a paper diary and tell us what their pain scores were in the morning, the afternoon, and at night when they lived with diabetic neuropathy or postherpetic neuralgia. And what this study discovered was that the participants all showed an increase in terms of their scores throughout the day over the course of the study. Another project that was done with osteoarthritis, which is a model of inflammatory pain, actually showed the opposite, where people began to show a lower pain score in the morning and then a higher pain score in the afternoon, which got better again. And so this has made people think about the fact that maybe, depending on the type of pain people have, they will have a different response in terms of whether their pain increases or decreases throughout the day. These circadian rhythms, like I said, are controlling the expression of these genes. And the question is, how do they do it? Normally, when we think of circadian rhythms, they get turned on and off by light cues. So when we see light in the morning, if you will, it sets off a series of cells turning on within what's called our central circadian clock, deep within our brain, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that nucleus deep in the brain is actually directly connected to our optic nerve. So when we see light, it sends a signal directly to that nucleus deep within the brain that says it's time to wake up. And when we get that signal, there's all these hormones that get secreted and other factors within the body that turn on all of our circadian clocks peripherally. So not just in the brain, but everywhere in our body. What we've now learned is that it's not just that light signal that sends that response, but there's a cellular cue that causes it. There's genes that do it. And those are a core set of clock genes that include BMAL1 and reverb alpha and beta. And these genes work in concert together to turn on and off all of those genes that we're talking about. Now, we know that these systems, so both the light cues and the genes controlling the cells themselves, have a large impact on our physiological function, when we wake up and when we go to sleep, and what we do throughout the day. What we're learning now, though, is that it's not just the light cues and the molecular cues that are causing this, but also our lifestyle choices as well. Whether you drink caffeinated beverages, what time you wake up and go to sleep, where you live, all have an impact on your circadian rhythms. You can imagine if you lived in northern Canada, the number of light hours that you have are very different in the winter than in the summer months. And this light rhythm, if you recall, is what turns on and off those hormonal signals that regulate our whole body's rhythms. So when you have these changes, you're going to have differences in terms of what your circadian rhythms look like. And that's different from when people live at the equator, when they have that full 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark. So it's really important, we think, not only to look at pain rhythmicity, which we've begun to show with that chronic low back pain group, but to see how circadian disruption might also be playing a role here. And so this is why we wanted to start the CircaPain study at a national level to see what's going on. And the importance of this circadian disruption comes from the fact that there are studies that show that people who have a circadian disruption actually have higher incidences of neurological diseases and disorders, including multiple sclerosis. They have other diseases that get exacerbated. And so this leads us to wanting to see how persistent circadian disruption might have an effect here. And what was really interesting was a study that was done in the late 80s that showed that people living in Australia showed a very clear difference in the rates of multiple sclerosis depending on where they lived. One of the things that we don't know a lot when we look at a map of Australia is that it's a very long country, like Canada. It's a very long country. And there's people living in the north and the south. So for instance, the north is Darwin and the south is, I believe Canberra is in the south. When you look at the daylight differences, so the numbers of hours of daylight from the first day of summer to the first day of winter, the change for people living in Darwin, for instance, is only about 3.5 hours. But for people living in Canberra, it's more like 8.5 hours. And so that change, depending on where you live, might impact your circadian rhythms. That might be a very simple way of controlling for circadian disruption. It's the same thing as somebody living in, let's say Windsor, compared to someone living in Iqaluit. The number of daylight hours that they experience will be very different. And that might be causing circadian disruption that might exacerbate disease or might even make diseases better. We don't know. These are the kinds of questions that we need to ask. So then I'm going to pass it over to Haley to talk about the CircaPain study and really taking this to the next level within the Canadian population that we're hoping to reach here.
All righty, thank you, Nader. So we've gotten a good background on the circadian control of chronic pain, and we know why this type of work is important. But now I'm going to walk you through what exactly we're doing in this field with the CircaPain study. So the overall arching goals of this study are to firstly determine why some pain fluctuates and other pain is constant. We want to know what factors there are within an individual, so on an individual basis, that might influence the rhythmicity or pattern of pain that someone is experiencing. Does it depend on the underlying conditions they have? Does it depend on where they live? Does it depend on if they work night shifts or drink caffeine? We're looking at a whole variety of factors just to try to shed some light on the variety of things that could happen in someone's life that might have an impact on how they experience chronic pain. And secondary to that, we're also trying to understand relationships between pain, mood, and fatigue, and how they all fluctuate and interrelate throughout the day. Because as we know, pain is a pretty complex experience, which can have impacts on both those other factors. So for starters, who is eligible for CircaPain? CircaPain is open to all adults in Canada, so those 18 years of age and older who have had persistent pain for more than 3 months, and those who have internet access. As I said, this is a Canadian-only study at the moment, but we are planning to expand internationally in the future. If you're planning to travel in the next 7 days, we do ask that you hold off on participating in CircaPain for a couple weeks, and that's because when you travel, say, across time zones or across latitudes, you're introducing other elements of potential circadian disruption into your internal system. So you might be getting different daylight hours, you might be having a shift in your sleep schedule, and this can impact the way that you respond to the survey itself. So what exactly makes up the CircaPain study? Well, it has 2 main parts, the first of which is a baseline survey. And so this is a 15 to 20 minute online survey where you answer some questions about sociodemographic factors, your chronic pain experience, and your sleep habits, among a few other things. And once you finish the baseline survey, you then complete the Symptom Diary. And this is a very short diary survey. It takes about 1 minute to complete, and you take it 3 times per day for 7 days. It occurs at 3 time points, 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. And within this Symptom Diary, we ask questions about your pain intensity, some of the moods that you're feeling, and your fatigue and physical activity. So let's dive a bit more into the Symptom Diary and figure out why it's important. So the Symptom Diary itself, if you choose to participate, will be sent to you by text or email. The choice is yours. You will click on the link and find this short survey where you get to rate your pain intensity and mood states, fatigue, as I said earlier. And these data, it allows us to track your pain intensity and see how it changes or how it stays the same throughout the day and throughout the week. And we use these numbers to assign each participant a pain pattern to try to figure out which factors on an individual basis are more likely to be associated with which pain patterns. Now, within this Symptom Diary, you'll be answering questions about your, I guess, what you consider to be your most intense pain or your worst pain, per se, because we know that some people do have more than one type of chronic pain. And so we'd like you to focus on just one type or one location, per se, for the Symptom Diary to try to dive down into what factors might be influencing how that one part of your body or all of your body feels at a certain time of day. Now, where can you find the study? Well, it's located on our website, www.circapain.ca. It can be accessed on desktop or on mobile, so you can even do it just on your cell phone. So CircaPain launched on November 30th, 2021. These numbers are from early February, but we have since amassed over 400 participants who have completed the baseline survey, with 85% of them going on to complete the Symptom Diary as well. Right now, our sample is majority people who identify as women, but we are looking to further diversify. So, and as well, just build the sample even further to try to get as many people involved as possible and really dive into the details of each person's chronic pain experience. So we'd love to have as many of you participate as possible and, tell your friends. Regarding the distribution geographically of participants, as I mentioned earlier, this is a cross-Canada study. And of course, Canada is a pretty big place. At the moment, the majority of our participants reside within the Eastern time zone, but we're looking to expand recruitment within the other 5 time zones in Canada. Now, something within this project that's particularly important to us is knowledge translation, because there's really no point in doing research if it's not actually understandable to the people that it impacts. And I've developed 2 knowledge translation projects to go along with the CircaPain study, the first of which is our blog. And this blog contains posts about chronic pain research and about the study itself, little updates written by trainees from our lab. And we'll soon be launching a call for art and writing pieces from people with lived experience. So if you'd like to share any of your stories with us, feel free to email us. I'll put the email up at the end, and we'd love to feature guest writers on our blog as well. And the point of this blog is really just to not only keep participants updated on the study itself, but also just try to provide information about pain research in a way that's accessible and interesting. So yes, just to reiterate, the features of this blog do fall into 2 main categories currently, the first of which would be items about the project, updates, and just learning about the people behind the project. There's a piece about our patient partners, which they were very kind enough to sit down for an interview with us for. And secondly, there are also pieces about circadian pain research in particular, which are written in very user-friendly ways. Now, the second part of these knowledge translation projects would be the CircaPain dashboard. And this is an interactive map that has a very slimmed down version of the data we've collected so far, just to keep participants updated on, what information we've gathered, what we're doing with their data. And this dashboard is updated on an ongoing basis to show people how the study is progressing. Alrighty, so if you participate in CircaPain, someday you might see your numbers reflected in here as well. Now, although the CircaPain project is still ongoing, we are looking to the future as well. We'd like to expand CircaPain on an international basis to further dive into the potential relationships between where someone lives and their chronic pain experiences, particularly with latitude and sunlight hours. But on the other side of that, we'd also like to do more work within Canada, aside from just our surveys. We would like to do a biological arm, rather a biological mechanistic arm to the study, in which we recontact some participants to ask if they would like to donate a blood sample, which would allow us to identify biomarkers for circadian disruption and rhythmic pain. And those findings would then be translated to a mouse model to test potential therapeutic targets. And just to kind of sum up why this work is important, with this study, we'll be identifying various predictors for pain fluctuation. So which things within a person's lifestyle might relate to them having circadian pain versus constant pain, and how does this impact their quality of life? And taking all that into account, it will eventually allow us to determine ways to improve pain management, whether that's going into the biological mechanisms that underlie these relationships, or if it's something like chronotherapy, changing the time of day at which medications are taken. And on that note, I wanted to say thank you for coming out to the webinar today. It's been a real pleasure getting to speak to you about this project. And if you're interested in taking the study, feel free to hop on our website there, circapain.ca. And if you have any questions, you can reach us at mydailypain@assemblylab.ca. the email is also featured on our website, and you can click on it there and it opens up a little email tab. And I guess we'll now open up the floor to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for that really interesting presentation. I always learn so much from these, so it's so fun. All right, so if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. You can find that at the bottom of your screen there, and then I'll ask the questions as they come in. Someone says, excellent presentation and an interesting study. So great. All right, so I'll start us off with a question that I had, which is, how do you think that healthcare providers or people with pain, what can they take from this work? How can we use it to, even at this kind of initial stage, what lessons can we take from this to better support people who live with chronic pain?
I'll start, and Haley, feel free to jump in. So I'll give an example of the problem with pain care with acute pain. So my wife gave birth to 2 kids by C-section, and when we were in the hospital, the nurses came by every 4 to 5 hours and gave her drugs to help with the pain. They didn't really ask, what was your pain like? It was, here's the medicine that you need for the pain that you have, without knowing what her level of pain might be. And we know now from our animal models that there is a rhythm to acute pain. So who's to say that there isn't a rhythm in acute pain after C-section or after any other type of pain that you have? And because we see these changes in neuropathic pain and chronic pain, it makes us think about the idea of chronotherapy, which is what Haley had mentioned. Why are we, the way that we're prescribed drugs is take, 2 pills in the morning and 2 pills at night. But what if you don't need the 2 pills at night? Maybe that's what's causing some of the problems with dependence that we see. Or, maybe you're going to be impacting other systems in the body by giving these drugs at a constant level when you only need it at one time of day, or maybe you need a higher dose at one time of day and no dose at another time. That's the first way that I think that this will help, is to make people think about, what does my pain look like at the individual level, and how can I potentially use that to my advantage in my own care? One of the things that we're trying to set up now, it turns out it's quite difficult, but what we're trying to set up now is that once a participant has completed the 7-day diary, we're doing our best to email the data back to the participant and to say, this is what your pain looks like. And this, I think, could be a really important tool that people can take to their physicians and to say, hey, this is what my pain looks like. Do you have any thoughts about how I could use this to take better care of myself? I know, so I live with epilepsy, and this is what we have in the community. It's called My Epilepsy Diary, and people fill it out whenever you have a seizure. You log on to the phone app and you say, I had a seizure at this day at this time. This is what happened before. This is what I think led to the seizure. And then at the end of the month, at the end of every time, you can just go to the app and you can send it by email to your neurologist, or you can print it out for yourself and say, this is what's, potential triggers for my seizures, or, when I have them most often. This is important. This, the idea of personalized care and personalized medicine hasn't really come to fruition yet. And I think one of the reasons why is because we're not looking at the individual. We're looking at large communities of people and trying to make a decision based on, 10,000 people. This project is taking that and flipping it and saying, no, we're going to look at each person individually and try to see if from each person we can identify subgroups and see where you might fit. And then even then, when we look at the molecular level, at the cells and the genes that the cells are expressing, I think, are going to see very big differences between people who might be in the same cluster. But that doesn't mean that the pain trajectory isn't true. What it means is it's caused by different mechanisms. There's different things causing different pain in different people. And so trying to identify what those molecules are that might be causing pain will help us develop newer and better drugs. And that's the ultimate goal of this, is to try to bring it to the clinic as quickly as possible to say, if someone has, a rhythm to their pain and it gets worse throughout the day, then start with this class of drugs. And I think that could be the next way of looking at, what pain is and how it functions in people.
Or I imagine looking at what are some of the routine changes that the person could make, or changes to things that they're doing, like when they exercise, or stressors that happen more in the morning versus at night. I'm thinking people's morning commute, if they're driving to work and, they're dealing, they have a lot of anger, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, so I was at Costco on the weekend and they sell melatonin by the bucket loads. And melatonin impacts circadian rhythms. And you almost wonder, first off, who's taking it and why are they taking it? Do they think that they have a rhythmic disruption or something like that? And the other thing is, we may actually have a potential therapeutic for people right there, which is already approved by the government of Canada and by the FDA to use, that might help some people. So one of the things that we're hoping to do from the chronic low back pain cohort that we have here in Kingston is to see how potentially melatonin might help people with constant pain. So that's the next phase of the study locally. But then going nationally, I think, is really important. And one of the things that I want to really point out here is we are looking at everybody who lives with chronic pain to take part in this study. We're not asking for people with just neuropathic pain or just inflammatory pain or one specific kind of pain or another. We want everybody, because we don't know what pain looks like at the individual level. And this will help us figure out what is going on at the individual level, to then say, okay, there's more people that have rhythmic pain with this type of disease than in that one. So it will, I think, give us clues about what might be causing the pain in different conditions.
This also makes me wonder about, in addition to, I'm wondering if you've looked at, in addition to kind of time of day that someone might experience more or less pain, but I'm also thinking time of year, right? Seasonal effectiveness disorder and things like daylight savings. I imagine over time, you'd be able to start seeing those types of patterns as well.
Yeah, Haley, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so that is definitely some of the interest within this area, because although we're looking at almost a snapshot of what someone's pain and routine is like. We're just looking at 1 week, but due to that whole difference in light hours, those shifts of daylight savings time, there are many factors throughout the year that could be pretty impactful for these patterns that we're seeing. So I do think that an interesting next step would be to almost extend the time frame of the diaries on a voluntary basis. In this would obviously not be for this specific study, but in the future, next step would be kind of in the vein of another study called Cloudy with a Chance of Pain, where people logged their pain intensity, their mood, their physical activity, similar factors to what we're looking at, but they did it once a day for as long as they wanted. Some people did it for 1 month, some people did it for 16 months, I think. And they were constantly, logging this data about how they were feeling. And within that specific study, they looked at it in relation to different factors of the weather. So humidity, temperature, so on. but it would be interesting to take that information and look at it more on a temporal basis. Still get, you know, the 3 time points, but stretch out the time frame, look at those big events like, you know, daylight savings time, as you said, latitude, to try to piece together how these changes in daylight throughout the year impact us, and just try to keep picking away at this very big, complex topic. Anything to add, Nader?
No, that's exactly it, right? Those day rhythms are really important, and the light hours, and so these are all working together to cause these changes here. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I'll just put out one last call for questions. If anyone has questions for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A. We do have one question. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it, but maybe you can kind of speak on it. They say, hello, and thank you for the excellent presentation. I have arthritis in my hip. My doctor told me that, quote, the pain is bigger than the disease. Sorry, the pain is bigger than the disease, end quote. Is this possible? And if yes, could you explain? Just any thoughts on that? I've never heard that phrase before personally.
Yeah, the pain is bigger than the disease.
Mm-hmm.
Let me think about that. So one of the things that we've come to learn is that many different factors impact pain and how we perceive pain. So for instance, one of our collaborators is looking at, that's Gabrielle Paget over at the University of Montreal, is looking at how stress might impact pain. And so what she's doing is a similar study to this one, but she's not asking at specific times of day. She's just getting random text messages sent to participants that say, what's your pain like and what's your stress level like? And she's hoping to see whether or not stress and pain are linked. What we're doing here is very similar, but just looking at the specific times of day to see if there's a rhythm in the pain throughout the whole thing without asking those kinds of, what's happening to you right now, apart from depression and fatigue. Now, I don't think that, so pain is bigger than the disease, right? Is that what it was? So is pain, so I think that the pain is a confluence of so many different factors playing together along with the disease, because there's emotional factors that, living with a disease, there's going to be fatigue, stress, all of these different things that work together to impact how we feel the pain. And I don't think that something like that is, so a statement like that, not only I find minimizes the pain for some people, but also minimizes the disease for others. You can imagine living with, multiple sclerosis pain. I think that the pain is not bigger than the disease. I think the disease is just as important as the pain that comes with it. So that's an interesting statement for a physician to make. I don't know if it's the right thing to say. Yeah.
I agree. All right, and I think we have time for one more question. This is an interesting one. Is it possible to define the optimal place, geographically, climate-related, etc., for an individual with chronic pain?
So let me answer that one as quickly as I can, because I know we have other questions that have come up that are pretty interesting too.
Yeah.
I've actually had people contact me who said that so it was a woman living in Timmins who went to Hawaii on vacation, and she wrote to me and she said, my pain got better when I was in Hawaii, and it got worse when I came back home. And could this be what could it be the rhythms of what's causing this? And so the answer is we don't know what the right place is to live. But we're hoping that this study will actually help us figure that out when we go international. We've begun translating it to multiple languages. We already have the French. We're going to Arabic, Portuguese, Spanish, Malay. The list kind of goes on to capture as many people as possible across the globe. And we're partnering with organizations and with people who treat people in pain across countries to try to see what pain looks like depending on where you live. Now, genetics will come into play as well as the environment, but at the end of the day, we think what we'll see is that some pain conditions are going to be, better if you live in the two poles, and others will be better if you live at the equator. And I think it'll depend on who the person is that you're looking at the end of the day. Everyone will be different. But if we see these shifts, I think that will be very telling in terms of what might be going on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll just say if anyone else has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out using the email address that's in the chat there, and I'm sure you'd be happy to speak more. But we are at 1 p.m. And I don't want to hold folks over time. So thank you so much again, both Haley and Nader, for an excellent presentation. And yeah, we look forward to seeing where this study goes. And I encourage anyone here who is interested in and qualified for this opportunity to please get in touch and participate in this exciting new research.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Ariel.
All right.
So if I can also ask anybody here who is, who sees people living with pain to please pass along word of our study to people that you see, because we do want to get as many people taking part in this study as possible.
Excellent. All right. Well, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and look out for the link to this recording in a couple of days.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.